Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello, and welcome back to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Mazak, and I am recording another podcast episode from my car on my iPhone. Apologies for any sound quality or the sound of the engine all of a sudden revving or something. I'm not driving. I have a hybrid. So I'm sitting here, and then eventually probably the hybrid engine will kick in. Anyway, you might hear traffic going by. Hopefully not. This is just a little life update before we get into this episode's topic, which is you can't write when you're mad. And this episode topic was inspired by my dear friend and fellow academic writing coach, Jane Jones. You heard her on, I think, the last episode of the podcast. And she was like, you should do a whole episode about how you can't write when you're mad. So I'm doing this episode, but it also has inspired a possible series about writing and emotions, because I think that's an important topic to talk about. You all have seemed to enjoy the last series I did, which was about the stages of the academic career. And so I'm thinking about organizing podcasts into little series like that, which make them a little bit more easy to refer, easy to binge once they're out there in the world. So I'm playing with that idea. If you have a thought about it, you can always write to me at Kathy@scholarsvoice.org and let me know what you think about a series about writing and emotions, academic writing and emotions. Okay, so a tiny life update. I think that I've mentioned before on this podcast that we are now the owners. Well, we don't own anything. We are now deeply in debt because we have purchased a dairy farm. My husband is a dairy cattle nutritionist and has been an extension agent and professor here at the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez for a long time. And we got this opportunity to buy this dairy farm, and I'm running the office. So I used to have like a full-time job of being a writing coach and creating the Navigate program and delivering it and making this podcast. And now I also have another full-time job, which is completely different, which is basically running all the finances and the operations and the business part of the dairy. And we moved to the dairy for the summer. There's like a house on the property that is for the administrator. We have an administrator, but we're like, just don't move into the house yet. We're going to move down there for the summer. Well, my husband is off from his professor job for the summer, and we're there with the whole family. And so I'll say it's been hard to record the podcast because there's no quiet place. Cows are always mooing and things are always happening and milking machine is always sounding. So actually my car with the air on is actually the quietest place that I can find to record with you. So that's what I'm doing today. So let's jump into the topic. You can't write when you're mad. So I know that all of you are, or many of you are frustrated maybe with the academy, with the culture of academia that causes us to have to tolerate many injustices and try to warp ourselves or try not to warp ourselves to fit into these expectations that the academy has for us. And at the same time, be ourselves and be successful and accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. So that can be impeded by the anger that we very justifyingly feel in many different situations. One of them is, well, I'm going to talk about kind of some different ways that we might feel anger, some examples made anonymous of clients who have experienced like long dry spells in their writing or just not being able to get into their writing because of anger. Like I said, there's many emotions that can kind of impede our writing. And I am going to do more podcast episodes about that. But I want to talk about anger today. So let's talk about what anger does to your writing, and then I'll give you some examples and some ways to move forward. So writing is emotional. I think that sometimes we can almost see it as kind of clinical. We might think of writing as a report. And so it is like facts that you're just reporting, but that is not what writing is at all. Writing is expression. And even if you're expressing science, right, or something that seems rather factual, the act of expressing is connected to our emotions and us as humans. If we're not in a good kind of emotional space, it is very difficult to write. If we're exhausted, it's difficult to write. A lot of times people talk about motivation, about procrastination, about all these different things that are really tied up in our emotions. And so if you are feeling anger at something, it can definitely get in the way of your writing. We have to admit this to ourselves, right? Like we really have to admit that writing is a creative act and it is steeped in our emotions. Even if we are not writing creative works like poetry or a play or something like that, our writing is tied up with our current emotional state. So part of the reason that when you go on like a writing retreat and the purpose is to write, part of the reason that you can is because you have at least somewhat of an emotional, it could be an emotional burden lift, right? Like for me, I always was able to get more writing done just because I was by myself and I didn't have to manage the emotions of being with my family, which even if everybody's having like a fantastic day, there's like a lot of emotional management that I do because I live in this house with, 5 people, me and 4 other people. And so when that's lifted, it's a great kind of energetic and emotional burden off of me, which helps me to write more. It might be similar for you, but I know for me, like that's why writing retreats, one of the reasons that writing retreats work. Another is because it kind of maybe can distract you long enough away from your emotions or whatever has been bogging you down that you can kind of write past those things. So I hope you are convinced that writing is emotional and that writing involves your kind of emotional state when you sit down to have a writing session is important. This is why I teach. This is why I do not advocate for, or I do not teach the write every day method. Actually, don't believe it's a method, but you can argue with me about that. Of course, if you do write every day and that kind of routine is really helpful for you, then you should do it. But I have found that again, like the emotional burden of like writing every day, that don't break the streak motivation is like almost a shaming motivation. And I do not write under shame. It just does not work out for me. So hopefully you are convinced at this point in the podcast that writing and your emotions are connected. Even though it is, academic writing, right? Maybe you think it's like supposed to be clinical and like, devoid of emotion. The act of writing as a human has emotions wrapped up in it. So today's podcast is about anger. So I want to give you some examples of like how this has come up in my writing coaching with clients. I think I started the podcast talking about injustice, and I really feel like that's a big one. So if something's going on in your department or even maybe in your field or whatever, group of academics you are surrounded with or you are in community with, if something is going on there that is making you angry, that you are feeling is an injustice, it can stand in the way of your writing. I remember very specifically when I was working as a professor, like everybody has this, I hope you don't actually. Well, I had a person in my department who just had like a thing against me, an older man who always was trying to find ways to like stop what I was doing or like just make me upset. And even talking about it right now makes my heart beat fast. And that was the reaction that I often had when I had to be on committees with him or when I would have an interaction with him in a department meeting, for example. Like I would get so upset because it was a really like unjust situation without going into a lot of details. But I would get so upset that I wouldn't be able to do anything for like days. Like I would usually lose that night's sleep because I would be so upset at the situation and what the guy said to me and, or how the guy acted or what he did. And then I just it was really hard for me to recover because I was just so mad, not really hurt, just angry, like purely angry. Not with imposter syndrome, because I knew I was right and he was wrong. He was trying to posture and he didn't have an academic leg to stand on. I knew all of that. So I would just genuinely be mad. And it would stop me from whatever I was doing and kind of become an obsessive thought for at least 24 hours, if not longer. That's an example of how anger has stopped me from writing. From clients, a classic one, and that happens very often, is that you get review feedback and the reviewer feedback is written in a way that is not constructive, that's disrespectful, that flips your switch and you get mad. And what can happen is because you're angry, you can't see the reviewer feedback for what it is. So sometimes reviewer feedback is posturing. And if you could kind of get past, I'm not suggesting you do this, but I'm saying if you could not get angry and just see it for posturing immediately, you might be able to get towards what to do with that feedback faster. But it's really hard not to get angry. You get angry, you're like, so mad at this reviewer. And then you leave the thing on your computer and you don't open it up because you're mad, right? And when you think about addressing the reviewer feedback, you might get mad again. So that's an example. And let me say that reviewer feedback, it can be hurtful, they can be wrong, they can be rude, and they can be right. And that can also make us angry, right? You can get mad, oh, dang it, they saw this thing and I really thought I was not going to have to address that. And I do. Okay. So that's something. Another thing that can happen with our writing, how anger can impede our writing, is that we have an unhelpful or late co-author, or your co-author was late and then gives you something half-baked and terrible. So you are mad at the co-author, right? You're resentful, you're mad, you're I waited so long for this feedback, or this person's not giving me any feedback. I really need this article for promotion or for this grant. And, my co-author is really holding me back. So we can feel anger towards our co-authors. And then finally, one that I'm afraid will become more common, which is you might be, not that it's more common, but you might be mad at your institution. And again, this kind of goes back to injustice and institutional malarkey, right? Institutional ridiculousness. So many reasons to be mad at the institution. None of them have to do with writing potentially, but they affect your writing because you're angry. I'll give you an example from a client, and this is the part that I think will be, might be increasingly common without getting specific. I have a client whose university was bought by another university. And the university where she had earned tenure and was a full professor got bought. They didn't fire the tenured people, so she got to keep her job, but her job changed completely. It was like, it just reminded me of like a colonial kind of situation, right? Where like the border moved over you and now the colonizers are different, or now you're colonized, right? It was like the community, the university was one thing, and it is now something else. All the rules have changed. The boss, the colonizer is a different person or a group of people with a different set of values. And you are there like you haven't done anything, right? You know, you did everything you were supposed to do, and the university changed. And I think that this might happen increasingly as smaller colleges get kind of eaten up by bigger universities potentially. And she just had so much anger about an emotional stuff about navigating that transition. And she really had, she had to help her colleagues navigate the transition and potentially her students. And she lost a lot of students along the way because that's not the kind of college they wanted. Like, she had to completely rethink the priorities of her career. She was now being evaluated completely differently. And she was really mad with the way the whole thing was handled and about how much work she had to do in order to help navigate this transition that she did not want. So this is all to say that reasons to be angry as an academic are many. I'm sure there are tons of others. So now we get to the part of the podcast is like, well, what to do about when you're feeling so angry that you can't write. So I think that the first thing to do is to get very specific about what you are angry about. So, for example, if you feel angry and you've been putting off a revise and resubmit or a resubmission because you got reviewer feedback that made you angry, facing that reviewer feedback and really looking at it and saying like, okay, what's making me angry here is not what the reviewer said, it's how the reviewer said it. Or it's making me angry because this reviewer obviously doesn't know what they're talking about, and they rejected my article because of the way that this person is misinformed or is posturing or trying to show themselves as knowledgeable, and they're not. So getting very, very specific. What is it exactly that you're mad about? Because I think that, especially with an emotion like anger, it's a very big emotion. We get clouded with like, what are you specifically angry about actually? Write it down. Like, what is the thing, right? If it was that your college got bought by another college, it's maybe that's not what you're necessarily angry about. You're angry because you are assumed to have to take on all of this extra work of the transition. Or you're angry because of the way they talk about you and your colleagues. Or, what is it? So the first step is really identifying it. The next step, and I am not a psychologist, so please take this with a grain of salt. But for me, I think it's important to think about, all right, if I'm angry about this, let me feel the anger. Because, for example, with the feedback thing, if you open the document, you read the feedback, and then you push it away because you don't want to feel the anger, avoiding your feelings is the longest path to moving through them and getting to the other side. So if you want to prolong being angry, you're trying to not feel angry, but all you're doing is prolonging the pain. So pinpointing, what is it exactly about this that is making me angry? And then feeling it, confronting it, not trying to push it down or push it away. Maybe it's not, with a lot of self-compassion, maybe it's not the right moment for you to do that. Maybe, you have to decide as an adult person what you're going to do. But I will say that my experience has been pinpointing the anger and being able to articulate exactly what you're angry about, and then going ahead and feeling the anger instead of trying to smush it down or not experience it has been important for me personally in being able to move past anger. Once I can do those two things, then I can start to bring in reason and think like, okay, well, how am I going to get out of this situation? Am I going to stay in the anger? Which again, like, is your choice as a grown-up. You can decide. You're going to stay in the anger. What do you lose when you stay in the anger? What do you gain? And really start thinking about it from just a tiny, tiny bit of a bigger perspective. And that might take time. So what I'm suggesting here, or what I would like to say, is to really treat yourself with a lot of compassion for your feelings and for you being a human experiencing stuff. Like, I think that is the worse than the anger is your own mental castigation that you're doing to yourself about the anger, right? Like, I shouldn't be angry about this, and I am, and it's stopping me from writing, period. You know what I mean? Like, instead of, like, that is this self-deprecation in a way, right? So really taking a mature perspective on the anger, thinking about how you want to work through it, really identifying what it is you're angry about, and then starting to, like, I enjoy journaling. You've heard me talk before about walking and thinking, maybe having a conversation with a friend or colleague specifically about this can help you work through it. You don't have to work through it fast. You don't have to work through it at all. You can stay angry. The thing won't get published. That might not be the end of the world, right? So I just want to say that the genesis of this podcast was talking to people who are experiencing real anger about something related to their writing projects. And then they're like, I don't know why I can't write. Well, you can't write because you're a human being and your anger is getting in the way of being in an emotional state that is conducive to writing. So I wanted to do this podcast to say that's okay because you're human. Take the time that you need to take to work through the anger if that's what you want to do. If you're like, well, I'm angry at this co-author, but I really think this thing should be out in the world. What are the steps you're going to take to work through the anger, to move forward with the co-author, or to, whether that's like firing the co-author or what. But the point is, you don't have to get over things so fast. And part of what might be holding you back is this thought like, I'm a bad academic or doing the wrong thing because I'm not getting over this fast. And that thought is also stopping you from writing. So working through all of this and admitting you might need a little time to get over and through anger, admitting that you need to work on it, helps humanize you as a scholar, right? And really treat yourself with self-compassion. So I hope that you find some benefit in this podcast episode. I will be talking more about emotions and writing. And I really wish you a wonderful, wonderful week, and talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.